Hello, and welcome to the Murder, She Wrote podcast, where I watch every episode of the 80s/90s show Murder, She Wrote. On today's Murder, She Wrote podcast, Jeff Conway and Jeanne Francis make for a very odd couple, and somebody murdered an owner of a drag club. Who could it be? Well, let's get started and find out. Hello. It has been forever and a day since I've done the Murder, She Wrote podcast, and I apologize. I've just been enjoying the episodes so much that I forgot that I'm supposed to be covering them for my podcast, like I said. Alright, so this episode is officially the second episode of Season 1. Like I said in my episodes of Baywatch, since they did a pilot movie, this is officially the second episode. The first episode of Murder, She Wrote was Deadly Lady, which I have already covered. And I suggest you listen to that one and also the pilot movie, or you can just listen to this one, it doesn't matter. This episode is entitled Birds of a Feather, and its air date was October 14th, 1984. And I'm doing something completely different. Instead of just having the book as opposed to like a picture on there, I have done a collage of various things that you are probably seeing on your screen as you're listening to this. And I will tell you exactly what you're looking at as we go along. So, this episode is set in San Francisco and is actually filmed in San Francisco, according to IMDb. I read somewhere, long time ago, can't find it now, that during the mid-season 1 or 2, they realized that Angela Lansbury could not travel from one location to the next. So they figured that it was better to just film it on the Universal backlot. And I learned this on the Universal Backlot Tour, which I saw on a video on YouTube because I haven't gone. I probably will never get to go because I don't have enough money for that. So this is one of the few episodes that is actually filmed on location at the location in which they are supposedly supposed to be. So we start off this episode with Mr. Drake jogging by the San Francisco Bridge, the Golden Gate Bridge. You can see Mr. Drake in the visual aid here on your left, next to the picture of Jeanne Francis and Angela Lansbury looking sort of shocked, which we'll get to what that is in a minute. Howard, played by Jeff Conway, as you may know from such things as Grease, one of my all-time favorite movies, and Taxi, one of my all-time favorite sitcoms, where he played the role of Bobby Wheeler. Plays the role of Howard. He goes up to Mr. Drake, who's coming back from jogging, and asks him if he can get out of his contract. Now, I have seen this episode now 5 times. I saw it on television, on Hallmark Channel once, then I watched it, for myself when I got the DVDs, because I've been watching them. I'm on the 4th season now, but I'm going back and doing the episodes for the podcast, because I'm making sure that none of them skip, and I'm enjoying them too, immensely. I can't tell you how awesome it is to watch this show with no commercials, no interruption, and to watch it whenever you want to. It is just so fun. Anyway, I watched it on Hallmark Channel, watched it on the DVD for the first time, watched it the second time to get all the pictures that you are seeing to put into this collage, and then I watched it again for this video, and now it's playing as I'm doing this so that I can remember what's going on, what goes on, so I don't miss anything, because the summarizing of the episode is the hardest part. And I can't do this collage thing for Baywatch because I watch it on Hulu, and there's no way for me to take pictures, take little snapshots of it on there. But I might do this for every episode. Might, I'm not sure. So anyway, Howard goes up to, and I thought that Mr. Drake was in the mob. Like, he comes across as a guy that would be in the mob. I mean, he looks like a guy, the kind of guy that would be in the mob. So that's what I thought it was about. But we'll get to what it's actually about. So Howard goes up to Mr. Drake, and he's like, Mr. Drake, I really want out of my contract. I don't want to, work at your club anymore. And Mr. Drake says, look, everyone loves you, the audience loves you, you're staying, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. You have a contract, and we're not going to break it. Howard gets a little mad and gets a little aggressive with Mr. Drake, and Mr. Drake tries to sick his dog on him. Then we get introduced to, Howard just walks away and gives up. We then get introduced to Mike, and you can see Mike on your right. He's underneath the Murder, She Wrote book title card. Mike is apparently in the same predicament as Howard. He wants out of his contract and he wants money that Mr. Drake owes him, but Mr. Drake refuses, and Mike gets physical with him, taking his finger and poking him in the chest and saying, you know what, buddy? No one would really miss you if you were gone. His dog gets a little upset and starts barking at him, but when Mr. Drake threatens to sick the dog on him, Mike puts his hands together and goes, "Arr!" and scares the dog, and the dog gets scared and runs in the car. After this, we cut to Victoria, played by Jeanne Francis, who a lot of people would know her from General Hospital. She played the role of Laura Weber and is part of the super couple, Luke and Laura. And she's still on General Hospital this very day. She was in other hit soap operas like Days of Our Lives, All My Children, my personal fave, and Loving, and The Young and the Restless, and the miniseries North and South. She plays Jessica's niece, Victoria. They're at a church, apparently rehearsing. She's surrounded by flowers, and she's, excuse me, I think I'm getting a cold. Anyway, she's surrounded by flowers, and she's allergic to flowers, so she keeps sneezing. Howard shows up, and he apologizes for being late. She says that her aunt has flown in from Maine, and she's there, and she was wondering if he would have dinner with them, and he says he can't, he has to work. Victoria starts to cry, and she's like, "You're always working, and I don't understand." And she keeps sneezing, and he gives her a handkerchief that has lipstick on it. This angers her, and she runs off. We then cut to a restaurant where Victoria and Jessica are looking at lobsters through a fish tank. A random guy tells them that the lobsters are flown in fresh every day from Maine. And Jessica goes, "Well, I hope they didn't get jet lag." And then she points and says, "We'll have the first two that moved." So then they sit down at the table, and they both order white wine, and Victoria proceeds to complain how she has no idea what Howard's doing. She's been there for 2 weeks so they can get married, and the insurance place that he works, he hasn't been employed there for 2 months. She has no idea where he lives or where he works, and he And she produces the handkerchief that he gave her, which had the lipstick stain on it. And she goes, and look at this. And Jessica goes, wow, that's not your shade. And she goes, well, how do I justify, if I love him and I trust him, how do I justify spying on him? And Mrs. Fletcher says, well, you have to, for your own peace of mind. And she says, well, I did find this matchbook for a club. Let's go and check it out. They don't eat their lobsters. So they go to this club, and I don't know the name of it. I've seen the episode, like I said, 4 times, and still I don't know the name. They go to this club, and Victoria notices the owner's picture on a sign, and she sees him and corners Mr. Drake and is like, that's my aunt, Jessica Fletcher. She's flown in from Maine. You may know her. She's the famous mystery author. She's got 6 bestsellers and a movie deal in the works, and tomorrow she's going to meet the mayor of San Francisco. We were wondering if we could have a table. So they get a table that's away from the stage, and Jessica says, something is off about this place, but I can't put my finger on it. And at first, I couldn't figure it out either until I saw the description on IMDb, which says, the owner of a drag club gets murdered, and it's up to Jessica to solve the crime. So, and it doesn't come across as that. When they come in and sit down at their table, there's a strange person on stage going, ooh, ooh, and acting really funny, and we can't see who it is. They go off the stage, and we're introduced to Buddy York, played by Mr. Carter from Welcome Back, Kotter, or Mr. Carter. And he's a comedian, and you can see him on the right of your screen with the drums. And right when he's about to do his act, Mrs. Drake arrives, played by Carol Lawrence, which you can see her underneath Mr. York's picture with the drums. So he tells a few lame jokes, and then a new performer comes on stage, which you can see in the visual aids underneath Howard's shoulder in the middle, where him and Victoria are kissing, which I'll get to that picture in a minute. And that person comes out and sings, there's somebody that I'm longing to see, somebody please. And just as they're singing, there's a scream. And the person that was performing on stage before Eddie York came on, the stage, goes running out, and he trips over a table, and it turns out to be Howard. You can see in my visual aid collage here that in the top right left-hand corner next to the picture of Mr. Drake is the reaction of Jessica and Victoria when they see Howard. Howard's reaction to seeing them is down underneath Mr. York's picture of the drums next to Mrs. Drake. And Mr. Drake's dead body is up on Howard's head, where he's kissing Victoria, and you can see Howard not in his dress, in between that, and a full thing of him in his dress next to the picture of Mr. Drake in the middle. So Howard goes to his dressing room and paces around, which there's that visual aid, like I said, next to Mr. Drake's picture of him alive by the Golden Gate Bridge. You can barely see it in the background. And he goes into his dressing room, and Victoria is so happy that he's not having an affair that she makes out with him while he's wearing his dress, and that is the big picture in the middle of the screen in the collage. Which is why I said they are a very odd couple in my intro there. So, they go and see the crime scene, and we get introduced to our Detective Novak. You can see him in the visual aids next to the performer I mentioned who sings There's Somebody That I'm Longing to See. underneath Victoria and Howard kissing. So they go in and they notice that he has been shot in the chest. And all of them are in there. And they say that Barbara, the secretary, who you can see in the right-hand corner above the title with a box of stuff in her hands, says, I saw him, like, with the gun over Mr. Drake's body. But Howard insists he didn't kill Mr. Drake. And then there was this really funny exchange between Detective Novak and Mrs. Fletcher, Jessica Fletcher, where she's in the crime scene and he goes, who are you? And she goes, I'm Jessica Fletcher. And he goes, did you know the victim? And she goes, no. And he goes, were you witness to the crime? And she says, no, I was out in the audience watching the performances. And he goes, well then, you need to leave. And the look she gives him is like, well, really? You know, like, normally detectives let me stay in here because I'm a mystery writer. But it happened way too quick and I couldn't really get any visual aids from that scene, but it was funny. So when Detective Novak goes to arrest Howard and he walks in and he sees Victoria and Howard both kissing and he goes, which one am I arresting? Haha, so funny. So Howard gets arrested while wearing his dress, and Mrs. Fletcher goes to Detective Novak's office and she's like, listen to me, detective. I have been waiting out there. I have jet lag. I'm supposed to be on a morning talk show for San Francisco talking about my latest book, and maybe I just will go over there. And my topic will not be my latest book. What will be how bad the police is in San Francisco. So he goes, all right, Mrs. Fletcher, this case is airtight. He was shown holding the gun over Mr. Drake's dead body. So in my book, he's guilty. And she goes, well, I would like to see Howard. And he goes, you can't see him. He's in central booking. And she goes, detective, when can I see him? So he brings Howard out, who is still wearing his dress. And she asks Howard point blank, now Howard, did you kill that man? And he goes, no. When I went in there, he was already dead. And I don't know why I picked up the gun. It was just sort of on the floor, and I just sort of picked it up. I didn't kill him, I swear. I didn't want Victoria to find out about me being me doing this. I'm the worst female impersonator in the world. But the audience loved me because I guess I was bad, I don't know. And Mr. Drake wouldn't let me go. But I wouldn't kill him over that. I'm trying to provide a really great future for Victoria. And I'm not getting a lot of acting jobs, so I figured this was the best way to earn some money. Do you think she's going to be ashamed of me? No, I don't think Victoria cares one lick about that. So Mrs. Fletcher sets out to investigate to get Howard out of the police station. When she finds out the time of death, she knows that it's virtually impossible for Howard to have killed Mr. Drake, but still he's the only suspect in jail. She decides to go see Mrs. Drake because it's a weird relationship. And we find out that Mike, who we got introduced to earlier, is actually the female impersonator that's saying, there's somebody that I'm longing to see. So you know that whole thing, how they say men like to wear women's clothes and they don't get any women because they wear women's clothes? Well, this show basically says, you're wrong about that. Because Howard's got Victoria and Mike's got Mrs. Drake. And they apparently really love each other, Mrs. Drake and Mike. So Mrs. Fletcher goes looking for Mrs. Drake and finds herself in Mr. York's dressing room. And she notices that he's the only dressing room that has a window. Remember that. And he says, yeah, I didn't really want to. He's like one of those coming across as a comedian where he's having to crack a joke like every time. He can't be serious. Like Lieutenant Novak basically says, "You don't seem to be all that upset about Mr. Drake's death," and he goes, "Oh, what do you want? If you want, I'll split a bouquet with you." So when Mrs. Fletcher comes in, he goes, "Yeah, I got a window. My lousy manager at least decided to get me a dressing room with some sunlight. But otherwise, I don't really like working here." And he tells her where Mrs. Drake is, and Jessica watches as Mrs. Drake fires Barbara, Mr. Drake's secretary, who's rumored to have been sleeping with him. So, in the visual aid that I said is in the right-hand corner above the title, Birds of a Feather, she has packed up all her belongings, and Mrs. Fletcher has a cab because she can read people really good and knows that Barbara is a gossip. So she offers Barbara a ride home and pays for it. Barbara tells her that Mrs. Drake has inherited the club and all the contracts, and now she's in control of everything. The show tries to go out of its way to try to say that Mike or Mrs. Drake killed Mr. Drake, but unfortunately, no. There's even a scene where they meet each other at a pier, and they're like, "We got to get our story straight for this Miss Fletcher woman because she's trying to get Howard off and pin someone else for the murder." And when they both assure each other that they didn't kill him, they hug each other, but they both think that the other did it. Like, "I know I didn't kill him, but I think she did. And I know I didn't kill him, but I think he did." But they didn't. But they're suspects anyway. So Mrs. Fletcher goes back to the club and tries to figure out exactly how the shot was muffled. She tries playing music, she tries playing drums, she tries doing everything short of, she can think of to try to muffle the shot. But you can hear it every single time. Detective Novak is getting annoyed. He does not like this. And then it turns out that Mr. York is there. And Jessica's like, "Well, Mr. York, I never thought you'd be here. We're trying to figure out how the shot. Oh, you think that one of us killed him? Like me?" And then a stage light falls, and Mr. York falls down, and you can see that in the visual aids to your left underneath Victoria and Jessica's shocked look when they see Howard in a dress, and Mr. Drake, him holding his neck. So Lieutenant Novak thinks that someone was trying to kill Jessica because she was close to whoever killed Mr. Drake, and Mr. York thinks that someone was trying to kill him, and she goes to visit him in the hospital. She then visits Mrs. Drake at the golf course, and Mrs. Drake tells her, "If you want to pin the murder on someone, because I didn't murder my husband, Mrs. Fletcher, you should go talk to Mr. York. He was desperate to get out of his contract with my husband. I'm sure he would even have murdered him for it." So Miss Fletcher goes to see him in the hospital, like I said, and she doesn't find any new information, but she finds out that Mr. York is now going to Vegas. So, after this, Howard is let go from the police station, and Mrs. Fletcher says, "Now don't you worry, kids, I intend to solve this. I intend to solve this, I swear I am, but I have to get some sleep, otherwise I'm going to drop from exhaustion." So that's exactly what she does. She goes into her room, but they are building something in the hotel, I guess, and there's lots of noise, and she grabs a pillow to muffle the sound, and that's, by George, she's got it. She realizes that someone used a pillow to muffle the sound of the gunshot. And when they go in Mr. Drake's office, they realize that's where the feather came from, not the bird, which I guess is why Birds with Feather is the title, but I don't think that's a good title. So they realize that the pillow that is sitting on the couch in Mr. Drake's office is not the same pillow that was sitting there when they were in there when they saw the crime scene, because Mrs. Fletcher has the pictures from the crime scene and notices the 2 different pillows. It turns out that the killer is Mr. York. Yes. Apparently Mr. York was so desperate to get out of his contract and to go to Vegas and do an act there that he decided to kill Mr. Drake instead of just, leaving. And you can see Jessica explaining this underneath the picture of the Murder, She Wrote title card, and next to Mike, because she explains that she knows it was him because the pillow that was put into Mr. Drake's office to replace the pillow that was in his office is actually from Mr. York's couch, because his pillow is the only pillow that is sun-warmed, because his is the only dressing room that gets sunlight. And you can also see Freddy explaining it in the visual aid next to Lieutenant Novak, underneath Victoria's shoulder in the visual aid. So eventually Victoria and Howard get married, which you can see in the visual aid next to, in between Mr. Drake's dead body, and Barbara coming out after getting fired above the title there of Birds of a Feather. And like I told you about our 2 main guest stars, Jeff Conway and Jeanne Francis, let's talk about our other guest stars. Mike is played by Dick G. I can't pronounce his last name. He's basically known for providing the voices for cartoon characters. He passed away in 2017 at the age of 85, but he did several voiceovers, like for a pup named Scooby-Doo and Captain Planet of the Planeteers. He was in 112 different things. His last known credit is the show Nick Tuck. So he had a very long career, and this, I think, is his only guest spot on Murder, She Wrote. Let me just check. Yep, that's his only guest spot. Okay, so Lieutenant Novak was played by Harry Girardeau. He died in 1995 at the age of 69. His last known credit is Fist of Honor. He's known for Dirty Harry, King of Kings, really good movies. This is not his only appearance on Murder, She Wrote. He will be in a couple other episodes as we go along. He was in 125 different things and had a very long and prosperous career. May he rest in peace. Freddy York, as I said, was played by the guy from Welcome Back, Kotter. His name is Gabe Kaplan. He didn't really do much acting after Welcome Back, Kotter because he was often typecast in teacher roles, I guess. And so he did a lot of behind-the-scenes work. And he is still alive to this very day. Martin Ledoux, probably did not say that right, played the role of Mr. Drake. He also died in 2017 at the age of 89 and worked up all the way to the end. He was in 178 different things throughout his career. And this is his only appearance on Murder, She Wrote. Really great actor, may he rest in peace. Then we have Carol Lawrence, who played Mrs. Drake. She is still alive today, and her last known credit is Sex and the City as Older Woman. And she will make several other guest appearances on Murder, She Wrote as we go along. She's been in 64 different things throughout her career. She's had a long career. Then we have Barbara Rhodes as Barbara the Secretary. She's still alive to this day. She is known for The Goodbye Girl, Harry and Tonto, and her last known credit is One Life to Live in 2011 as Irene Manning. She's been in 108 things and has a long, prosperous career, and she guest stars in one other episode of Murder, She Wrote aside from this one. That's all our guest stars. Overall, this was a fantastic episode. It had its hilarious moments. I don't like the title though, so I'm going to rename it. I think it should be renamed Murder is a Drag. Hopefully you think that's clever. But I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode, and as well as the visual aid collage, and maybe I'll do this for every episode. I'm not sure. It took a while to try to do that, really. But I hope you enjoyed this episode. Have a great day, have a great night, and thank you for listening. If you like what you see, please subscribe, and maybe comment below and tell me what your favorite Murder, She Wrote episode is, because I may soon be covering it. Believe me, there's a lot of episodes, and I will get there, I promise. Anyway, thanks for watching and listening, and have a great rest of your day.